The late afternoon sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 42nd floor, casting long shadows across the mahogany desk where Marcus Chen sat motionless, his finger hovering over his phone screen. Below him, the city sprawled endlessly, a maze of steel and glass that he had conquered through sheer determination and sleepless nights. Yet here he was, paralyzed by a simple dating profile picture. Sarah Williams smiled back at him from the screen, her brown eyes warm and genuine, surrounded by a classroom full of children who clearly adored her. Her bio was refreshingly honest, mentioning her love for teaching third grade, weekend volunteering at the local shelter, and her dream of opening a literacy program for underprivileged kids. No mention of designer brands, expensive restaurants, or luxury vacations. She seemed almost too good to be true. Marcus leaned back in his leather chair and closed his eyes, remembering another woman with kind eyes and an honest smile. Linda had been gone for 3 years now, taken by cancer at 31, leaving him to raise their daughter Emma alone. On her deathbed, she had made him promise to find love again, to give Emma the mother she deserved. But every attempt since then had ended in disappointment when women discovered his wealth and transformed into different people entirely. The intercom buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. His assistant's voice crackled through the speaker with professional efficiency. "Marcus, the board meeting has been moved to tomorrow morning at 9. Also, Emma's school called about the parent-teacher conference next week." Marcus pressed the intercom button and responded with quiet authority. "Thank you, Jennifer. Please confirm my calendar is clear after 6 tonight. I have somewhere important to be." He stood and walked to the window, watching tiny figures move along the sidewalks below like ants in a carefully organized colony. These people lived normal lives, worried about normal things like mortgage payments and grocery bills. They dated without wondering if someone loved them or their bank account. Marcus envied them that simplicity, that ability to be authentic without fear. His phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah. "Looking forward to meeting you tonight, Mike. The coffee shop on 5th Street at 7 works perfectly for me. Thanks for suggesting somewhere low-key. Mike." The name felt foreign on his tongue, but it was necessary. Mike Thompson, building maintenance supervisor, divorced father struggling to make ends meet. It was a carefully constructed identity that allowed him to test a woman's true character before revealing who he really was. His friend James thought the whole charade was ridiculous, but James had never been pursued by gold diggers who saw dollar signs instead of a grieving widower. Marcus opened his desk drawer and pulled out a worn leather wallet, replacing his platinum credit cards with a single debit card connected to an account with just enough money for modest dates. He removed his Rolex and slipped on a simple Timex that he kept for occasions like this. In the small mirror beside his computer, he practiced his Mike Thompson expression, softening the authoritative set of his jaw and allowing vulnerability to creep into his eyes. The elevator descended smoothly toward the parking garage, where his Mercedes waited alongside his other vehicles. But tonight, Mike Thompson would drive the beat-up Ford pickup truck that Marcus kept for construction site visits. He had changed clothes in his private bathroom, trading his tailored suit for worn jeans and a flannel shirt that smelled faintly of motor oil. As he drove through the city streets toward the modest neighborhood where the coffee shop waited, Marcus thought about Emma. She was spending the evening with Mrs. Patterson, their longtime housekeeper who had become like family since Linda's death. Emma knew about Daddy's dates, had even helped him practice his Mike Thompson voice, giggling at how different he sounded. But she also asked difficult questions about why he couldn't just be himself, why he had to pretend to be someone else to find someone who might love them both. The coffee shop appeared ahead, a small corner establishment with mismatched chairs and local artwork covering the walls. Through the window, Marcus could see Sarah already seated at a small table, reading a worn paperback and occasionally glancing toward the door. She wore a simple sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. No jewelry except for small silver earrings that caught the warm light from the vintage lamp scattered throughout the space. Marcus parked the truck and took a deep breath, transforming himself into Mike Thompson one final time before opening the door. The evening air carried the scent of coffee and fresh bread from the bakery next door. Somewhere in this city tonight, his real life waited in a mansion overlooking the harbor, where Emma was probably finishing her homework and asking Mrs. Patterson when Daddy would be home. But here, in this moment, he was just Mike, a maintenance worker hoping to find someone who might love him for who he pretended to be. He pushed open the coffee shop door, and Sarah looked up from her book with that same warm smile from her profile picture. Her eyes lit up with genuine pleasure as she recognized him from his carefully casual photos. Marcus walked toward her table, each step taking him deeper into a deception that he hoped would finally reveal the truth he desperately needed to find. Where in the world are you watching this story unfold tonight, and what time is it where you are? Have you ever wondered what it would be like to hide who you really are, just to discover if someone could love the person underneath? Sarah stood to greet him, extending her hand with unaffected warmth, and Marcus realized that whatever happened next would change everything for both of them. Sarah's handshake was firm and genuine, her smile reaching her eyes in a way that immediately put Marcus at ease despite his carefully maintained nerves. She gestured toward the empty chair across from her, and he noticed how she had chosen a table near the window where the evening light created a warm, intimate atmosphere without feeling too formal or presumptuous. "I hope you don't mind that I already ordered," she said, indicating her steaming mug of coffee. "I'm a bit of a caffeine addict, especially after long days with 28 third graders who somehow have more energy at 3 o'clock than they did at 8 in the morning." Marcus settled into his chair, allowing Mike Thompson's more relaxed posture to take over. "No problem at all. I'll grab something in a minute. How do you manage that many kids without losing your mind? I can barely handle my 80-year-old daughter some days." Sarah's face lit up with genuine interest, and she leaned forward slightly. "You have a daughter? That's wonderful. What's her name? I love hearing about my students' families, but it's even better talking to another parent who understands the beautiful chaos of raising a little person." "Emma," Marcus replied, and for the first time tonight, his smile was completely authentic. "She's everything to me. Smart as a whip, stubborn as her mother was, and has this way of seeing right through any excuse I try to give her. She keeps me honest." The barista, a young man with paint-stained fingers and kind eyes, approached their table with practiced ease. "What can I get you tonight, sir?" Marcus glanced at the menu board, noting the prices and choosing accordingly. "Just a regular coffee, black, thanks. And maybe one of those chocolate chip cookies for later. My daughter has a sweet tooth, and I promised I'd bring her something back." Sarah watched this exchange with interest, and Marcus caught something in her expression that he couldn't quite identify. Appreciation, perhaps, for a father who remembered his child even during his own evening out. When the barista left, she spoke with warm curiosity about his work as a maintenance supervisor, asking detailed questions that showed genuine interest rather than polite conversation. "That must be really satisfying work," she said after he described his fictional job fixing heating systems and maintaining office buildings. "You get to solve problems every day and make people's lives more comfortable. I imagine there's a lot of variety, never knowing what challenge you'll face next." Marcus found himself surprised by her perspective. Most people, especially women he had dated in the past, viewed maintenance work as something to be pitied or overlooked. Sarah spoke about it with the same respect she might show a doctor or lawyer. "It is, actually. Every building has its own personality, its own quirks. You learn to listen to what they're trying to tell you." The conversation flowed naturally as the evening deepened around them. Sarah shared stories about her students, her eyes dancing with affection as she described their personalities and small triumphs. She talked about Maria, who had been struggling with reading until Sarah discovered she learned better through music, and about David, whose behavioral problems disappeared when given responsibility for the class garden. Marcus listened with growing fascination, watching how her hands moved expressively as she spoke, how her voice softened when she mentioned a child who needed extra encouragement. This was a woman who poured her heart into her work not for recognition or advancement, but because she genuinely cared about making a difference in young lives. When an elderly waitress from the diner next door entered the coffee shop, clearly exhausted after a long shift, Sarah immediately stood and offered her own chair. The woman gratefully accepted, and Sarah spent several minutes asking about her grandchildren, listening with the same attention she had given Marcus. It was a small gesture, but it revealed something profound about her character. After the woman left, Sarah returned to her seat with an apologetic smile. "Sorry about that. Dolores works 3 jobs to help support her daughter's family. She's one of the strongest people I know, and sometimes I think we all need someone to notice that strength." Marcus felt something shift inside his chest, a recognition that he was witnessing something rare and precious. This wasn't performed kindness for his benefit, it was simply who Sarah was. "Don't apologize," he said quietly. "That was beautiful to watch. The world needs more people like you." As they prepared to leave, Sarah insisted on paying for her own coffee, despite Marcus's protests. "I believe in equality," she said with a gentle but firm smile. "Besides, teachers might not make a fortune, but we're perfectly capable of buying our own coffee." Outside the coffee shop, the evening air carried the sounds of the city settling into night. Sarah turned to him with obvious pleasure, extending her hand once more. "I had a wonderful time tonight, Mike. Would you like to do this again sometime? Maybe somewhere we can both bring our kids?" "I'd love to meet Emma, and I think she might enjoy the Children's Museum downtown." Marcus shook her hand, acutely aware that every moment of connection was built on a foundation of deception. "I'd like that very much," he heard himself say. "Emma would love the museum, and I think she'd really like you too." As Sarah walked to her modest sedan, Marcus watched her go with a mixture of elation and growing dread. She was everything he had hoped to find, everything Emma needed, everything his heart craved. But she had fallen for Mike Thompson, a man who didn't exist, and Marcus had no idea how to bridge the gap between the truth and the lie that had brought them together. The Children's Museum buzzed with weekend energy as families explored interactive exhibits and children's laughter echoed through the colorful halls. Marcus had arrived early, positioning himself near the entrance where he could watch Emma's face when she met Sarah for the first time. His daughter stood beside him in her favorite purple dress, her dark hair braided with small butterfly clips that caught the morning light streaming through the museum's glass ceiling. Emma tugged on his sleeve with barely contained excitement. "Daddy, are you sure she's going to like me? What if she thinks I'm weird because I like reading more than playing with dolls?" Marcus knelt down to Emma's eye level, straightening one of her butterfly clips with gentle fingers. "Emma, sweetheart, anyone who doesn't appreciate how amazing you are isn't worth worrying about. Besides, Sarah is a teacher. I think she'll love that you enjoy books." When Sarah appeared through the entrance doors, Marcus felt his breath catch slightly. She wore a cheerful yellow sundress and comfortable walking shoes, her hair loose around her shoulders and her face bright with anticipation. But it was Emma's reaction that truly moved him. His daughter's initial shyness melted away the moment Sarah crouched down and spoke to her at eye level, just as Marcus had done moments before. "You must be Emma," Sarah said with genuine warmth. "Your dad told me you're one of the smartest 80-year-olds he's ever met. I brought something I thought you might like." From her purse, Sarah produced a small book with beautiful illustrations on the cover. It was a collection of fairy tales from around the world, clearly chosen with care rather than grabbed hastily from a gift shop. Emma's eyes widened with delight as she accepted the book, immediately opening it to examine the pictures with the careful attention of a true book lover. "These are stories I share with my students," Sarah explained. "Some are from countries you might not have heard of yet, but they all have brave heroes and important lessons. I thought maybe we could read one together later if you'd like." Marcus watched this interaction with growing amazement. Sarah had instinctively understood what would appeal to Emma, had taken the time to choose something meaningful, and had presented it without any expectation of gratitude or praise. She simply wanted to connect with his daughter through their shared love of stories. As they moved through the museum exhibits, Marcus found himself seeing the displays through Sarah's teacher perspective. She engaged Emma in conversations about science and history, asking questions that encouraged critical thinking while making learning feel like play. At the water table exhibit, she helped Emma understand concepts about physics and engineering, building elaborate contraptions with pipes and wheels that made Emma giggle with delight. "Look, Daddy," Emma called out, her face flushed with excitement. "Sarah showed me how to make the water go uphill using these special wheels. Isn't that amazing?" Marcus nodded with genuine appreciation, but his attention was divided between Emma's joy and his growing awareness of Sarah's natural teaching abilities. She had transformed a simple museum visit into an adventure of discovery, creating moments of wonder that Emma would remember long after they left. During lunch at the museum cafe, Sarah listened with rapt attention as Emma shared her favorite books and her dreams of becoming either a veterinarian or an astronaut, depending on which seemed more interesting on any given day. Sarah took both career aspirations seriously, asking thoughtful questions about what Emma found appealing about each profession and sharing stories about former students who had pursued similar interests. "You know," Sarah said thoughtfully, "some of the best veterinarians I know started by reading everything they could about animals when they were your age. And astronauts need to understand lots of different subjects, especially science and math. It sounds like you're already on the right track for either adventure." Emma beamed with pride, and Marcus felt his heart constrict with a mixture of love and guilt. His daughter was blossoming under Sarah's attention, responding to someone who saw her intelligence and encouraged her dreams. But every moment of connection was built on his deception about who they really were. After lunch, they visited the art studio where children could create their own masterpieces. Sarah sat beside Emma at a small table covered with paints and brushes, helping her create a landscape painting while sharing techniques she had learned from working with young artists. Marcus watched from nearby, pretending to examine other children's artwork while actually observing how naturally Sarah and Emma interacted. "Your daughter is remarkable," Sarah said quietly when Emma became absorbed in adding details to her painting. "She's curious about everything, asks the most thoughtful questions, and has such a kind heart. You've done an incredible job raising her on your own." Marcus felt the familiar stab of guilt that had been growing stronger throughout the day. "Thank you," he replied, his voice rougher than intended. "She's the best part of my world. I just want to make sure she has everything she needs to grow into the amazing person she's already becoming." Sarah studied his face with those perceptive brown eyes, and for a moment Marcus wondered if she could see through his carefully constructed facade. There was something in her expression that suggested she understood the weight of single parenthood, the constant worry about whether you were enough for your child. As the afternoon drew to a close and they prepared to leave the museum, Emma surprised them both by asking if Sarah could come to dinner sometime soon. "She wants to show Sarah her room and the treehouse in their backyard," and Marcus realized with growing panic that maintaining his deception was becoming increasingly complicated. Sarah accepted the invitation with obvious pleasure, and as they walked toward the parking lot, Marcus struggled with the knowledge that he was leading them all deeper into a web of lies that would eventually have to unravel. Emma skipped between them, chattering about her favorite exhibits and already planning what she wanted to show Sarah during their next visit together. The elementary school gymnasium had been transformed into a festive marketplace, with colorful banners hanging from the ceiling and dozens of booths selling everything from homemade crafts to baked goods. Parents and children wandered between the displays, their voices creating a warm buzz of community activity that filled the large space with energy and purpose. Marcus arrived wearing his carefully chosen Mike Thompson outfit, feeling increasingly uncomfortable with each step deeper into Sarah's professional world. Sarah spotted him near the entrance and hurried over, her face glowing with excitement and nervous energy. She wore a bright blue dress that brought out her eyes, and a small pin on her lapel that read "Reading Changes Lives" in cheerful yellow letters. Her enthusiasm was infectious as she took his arm and began guiding him through the crowded gymnasium. "I'm so glad you came," she said, her voice barely audible above the happy chaos around them. "This fundraiser means everything to our school. We're trying to raise money for new books, art supplies, and a computer lab that our kids desperately need. Most of our families are working so hard just to make ends meet, so events like this are how we bridge the gap between what the district provides and what our children deserve." Marcus nodded, following her lead while internally calculating that he could fund everything they needed with what amounted to pocket change from his perspective. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was surrounded by people struggling to provide basic educational resources while he possessed the means to solve their problems instantly. But Mike Thompson, building maintenance supervisor, would never have that kind of financial power. At the first booth they visited, Sarah introduced him to Mrs. Rodriguez, a soft-spoken woman selling handmade quilts alongside her twin daughters. Sarah immediately crouched down to the girls' level, asking about their own school projects and listening with genuine interest as they described their science fair experiments. She remembered details about each child's interests and progress, speaking to them with the same respect and attention she would give any adult. "These quilts are absolutely beautiful," Sarah told Mrs. Rodriguez. "I know how much time and love goes into each one. The money you raise tonight will help buy new reading books for the library, and I want you to know that your daughters will be among the first to benefit from your hard work." As they moved through the gymnasium, Marcus watched Sarah interact with family after family, teacher after colleague, student after former student. She knew everyone's name, remembered personal details about their lives, and spoke with each person as if they were the most important individual in the room. This wasn't networking or professional obligation, it was genuine care for her community. At the book fair booth, Sarah paused to examine the selection of children's literature with the practiced eye of an experienced educator. She picked up various titles, flipping through pages and reading sample passages aloud to gauge their appropriateness for different reading levels. Marcus found himself drawn into her enthusiasm as she explained why certain books would appeal to specific students in her class. "This one would be perfect for Marcus," she said, holding up a book about space exploration. "He's been fascinated by astronauts ever since his older brother joined the Air Force. And this poetry collection would be wonderful for Isabella, who writes her own poems during recess but is too shy to share them with the class yet." Marcus realized he was witnessing something remarkable, a teacher who saw each child as an individual with unique interests, strengths, and dreams. Sarah didn't just teach curriculum, she nurtured human potential with a depth of caring that took his breath away. When she mentioned that she often bought books for her classroom with her own limited salary, Marcus had to clench his fists to keep from offering to purchase the entire booth on the spot. The evening's highlight came when Sarah was called to the small stage at one end of the gymnasium. She had been asked to speak about the school's literacy program, and Marcus watched with growing admiration as she addressed the crowd with confidence and passion. Her voice carried clearly through the space as she described the progress her students had made, the challenges they still faced, and the dreams they harbored for their futures. "Every child in this room has unlimited potential," she said, her eyes scanning the audience with conviction. "Some of them come to us reading below grade level, some struggle with English as a second language, and some face challenges at home that would overwhelm many adults. But when we give them the right tools, the right support, and the right encouragement, they achieve things that amaze even their teachers." She shared specific stories about students who had overcome obstacles, always protecting their privacy while celebrating their achievements. Marcus found himself completely captivated by her ability to inspire others while remaining humble about her own role in these successes. When she finished speaking to enthusiastic applause, he realized he was clapping harder than anyone else in the room. Later, as they walked between booths sampling homemade cookies and admiring student artwork, Sarah introduced him to her colleagues with obvious pride. "This is Mike," she would say, "he works in building maintenance and has a daughter Emma's age." She never apologized for his profession or attempted to inflate his status. In her world, honest work and good character mattered more than impressive titles or bank account balances. Near the end of the evening, Marcus overheard a conversation between Sarah and another teacher about budget cuts that might eliminate the art program next year. Sarah's face fell with genuine distress as she discussed how devastating this would be for students who found their voice through creative expression rather than traditional academics. She mentioned staying late after school to write grant applications, spending her weekends researching funding opportunities, and using her own money to buy supplies when necessary. Marcus excused himself to the men's room, where he stood alone for several minutes trying to process the emotions flooding through him. Sarah was everything he had hoped to find: kind, intelligent, dedicated, and genuine. But she was also struggling financially to support the work she loved, while he possessed resources that could solve every problem she faced. The deception that had seemed necessary for protecting his heart now felt like a cruel barrier preventing him from helping the woman he was falling in love with and the children she served so selflessly. The morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows of Marcus's mansion as Emma sat at the granite breakfast bar, methodically eating her cereal while studying her father's face with the perceptive intensity that always made him slightly uncomfortable. Mrs. Patterson bustled around the kitchen, preparing lunch boxes and organizing the day's schedule, but Marcus could feel his daughter's questioning gaze following his every movement. "Daddy," Emma said finally, setting down her spoon with deliberate precision, "when can I have Sarah over for dinner? You said maybe soon, but that was 2 weeks ago. I want to show her my room and the treehouse you built for me. I think she would really like our garden too." Marcus paused in the middle of reviewing his morning emails, feeling the familiar knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. The mansion's opulent surroundings seemed to mock him as he considered how impossible it would be to maintain his Mike Thompson persona in this environment. The marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and original artwork covering the walls would instantly expose his deception. "Soon, sweetheart," he replied, his voice strained with the effort of appearing casual. "I just want to make sure the timing is right. Sarah is very busy with her teaching, and I don't want to overwhelm her with too much too fast." Emma's expression grew thoughtful, and she tilted her head in the way that always preceded her most difficult questions. "But Daddy, why do you always seem worried when we talk about Sarah? When you talk about work or business meetings, you sound confident and strong. But when Sarah's name comes up, your voice gets quiet and you look sad. Don't you like her?" The question hit Marcus like a physical blow, and he realized that his 80-year-old daughter had observed something he thought he had been hiding successfully. He moved around the breakfast bar and sat beside her, taking her small hands in his much larger ones. "I like Sarah very much, Emma. More than I've liked anyone since your mother died. That's exactly why I'm worried. I want everything to be perfect, and sometimes when something is really important to you, it can feel scary." Emma studied his face with those dark eyes that reminded him so much of Linda. "Is it because you're afraid she might not like us if she knows we're rich? Like those other ladies who only wanted to marry you for your money?" Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. Emma's innocent wisdom had cut straight to the heart of his deception, revealing the truth he had been trying to avoid acknowledging even to himself. He was trapped between his need to protect his heart and his growing love for a woman who deserved honesty above all else. "Something like that," he admitted quietly. "Sarah is different from anyone I've ever met, Emma. She cares about people, really cares, not about what they own or how much money they have. I just want to be sure that what we have is real before I tell her everything about our life." That evening, Marcus sat in his home office reviewing quarterly reports when his phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah. Her words were cheerful but contained an undercurrent of stress that made his chest tighten with concern. The school's heating system had broken down again, and the repair costs were straining an already tight budget. She mentioned having to cancel some upcoming field trips to pay for the emergency repairs. Marcus stared at the message for several minutes, his fingers hovering over the keyboard as he struggled with how to respond. As the CEO of a major corporation, he had contacts who could fix the heating system for a fraction of the quoted price. He could make a phone call and solve the problem within hours. But Mike Thompson, building maintenance supervisor, would have limited resources and connections. He finally typed back a carefully neutral response, expressing sympathy and offering to look at the system himself if it would help. The lie felt heavier with each word, but he couldn't reveal his true capabilities without exposing everything else about his fabricated identity. Later that week, Sarah called him during her lunch break, her voice tight with frustration and exhaustion. She had been staying late every evening to write grant applications, researching funding opportunities for the programs that meant everything to her students. The stress was clearly taking its toll, and Marcus could hear the weariness behind her attempts to remain positive. "I'm sorry for complaining," she said after describing her latest funding rejection. "I know everyone has their struggles, and teaching isn't exactly known for making people wealthy. It's just that these kids deserve so much more than we can give them right now." When I see Maria struggling to read because we don't have enough books at her level, or watch David lose interest in science because our lab equipment is from the 1980s, it breaks my heart. Marcus gripped the phone tighter, fighting every instinct that screamed at him to reveal the truth and offer to solve every problem she faced. You're not complaining, Sarah. You're fighting for children who need someone to believe in them. That's not something to apologize for, it's something to be proud of. After the call ended, Marcus sat in his office surrounded by the trappings of his success, feeling more isolated than he had since Linda's death. Through the windows, he could see the city stretching toward the horizon, full of people living authentic lives without the burden of elaborate deceptions. He thought about Emma's questions, Sarah's struggles, and the growing weight of maintaining a lie that was preventing him from being the man both of them needed him to be. The irony was crushing. He had created Mike Thompson to find someone who would love him for who he truly was, but the deception was preventing him from being authentic with the one person who had shown him genuine love and acceptance. Sarah had fallen for the man he pretended to be, while his real self remained hidden behind walls of his own construction. Where in the world are you tonight, and have you ever found yourself trapped by choices that seemed necessary at the time? Have you ever wanted to help someone you care about, but felt unable to reveal the extent of what you could offer? Marcus closed his laptop and walked to the window, watching the lights of the city twinkle like stars against the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, Sarah was probably still working late in her classroom, grading papers, and planning lessons for children who had no idea how lucky they were to have someone who cared so deeply about their futures. The call came at 11:30 on a Thursday night, just as Marcus was reviewing contracts in his home study. Sarah's name appeared on his phone screen, and he could hear the exhaustion and defeat in her voice before she even spoke. Her car had broken down on the way home from a late parent conference, leaving her stranded in the school parking lot with a mechanic's estimate that might as well have been $1 million given her current financial situation. "I'm so sorry to bother you this late," she said, her voice catching slightly. "I called a tow truck, but the repair shop won't even look at it until Monday, and the estimate they gave me over the phone is more than I have in my savings account. I just needed to hear a friendly voice before I figure out how I'm going to get to work tomorrow." Marcus gripped the phone tighter, staring out at his circular driveway where 3 luxury vehicles sat gleaming under the security lights. In his garage, he had a BMW that he rarely drove, perfectly maintained and available for immediate use. As CEO, he could arrange for Sarah to have access to a company vehicle within hours. But Mike Thompson would have none of these options available to him. "Where are you right now?" Marcus asked, already reaching for his keys. "I can come pick you up. It's too late for you to be waiting alone in a parking lot." The drive to Sarah's school took 20 minutes in his pickup truck, and he found her sitting on the front steps of the building, her shoulders slumped with exhaustion and worry. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of financial stress that Marcus could eliminate with a single phone call. When she climbed into his truck, he could see the tears she had been fighting to hold back. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. "I know it's late and you have work in the morning. I just didn't know who else to call. My sister lives 3 states away, and most of my teacher friends are dealing with their own money problems." During the drive to her modest apartment, Sarah explained the impossible mathematics of her situation. The car repair would cost nearly $1,000, money she simply didn't have after covering her rent, student loan payments, and the classroom supplies she regularly purchased with her own funds. She had been considering taking a weekend job at a local restaurant, working Friday and Saturday nights to supplement her teaching income. Marcus listened with growing anguish, knowing that he spent more on a single business lunch than she was struggling to find for essential transportation. The restaurant job would mean sacrificing her weekends, the precious time she used for lesson planning, grading papers, and the volunteer work that gave her such joy. It would also mean less time for their developing relationship, fewer opportunities for Emma to bond with the woman who was becoming increasingly important to both their lives. "Maybe I can help," Marcus offered carefully. "I know some people in the auto repair business. Sometimes they're willing to work out payment plans or find less expensive solutions." Sarah turned to look at him with surprised gratitude, and he saw hope flicker in her tired eyes. That would be amazing, Mike. I hate asking for help, but I'm running out of options. I can't miss work because I need every day's pay, and I can't afford to miss the volunteer commitments I've made to the literacy program at the community center. As they sat in his truck outside her apartment building, Marcus struggled with an almost overwhelming urge to reveal everything and solve her problems immediately. He could see the stress lines around her eyes, the way she held her shoulders as if carrying an invisible weight. This was a woman who gave everything to others and asked for so little in return, yet he was powerless to help her because of the elaborate deception he had constructed. Sarah reached over and squeezed his hand gently. "You're such a good man, Mike. I don't know what I did to deserve having you in my life right now, but I'm grateful every day. Having someone who understands the challenges of single parenting, someone who sees Emma the way you do and appreciates what I'm trying to accomplish with my students, it means more than you could possibly know." Her words hit him like physical blows, each expression of gratitude and affection deepening his guilt about the fundamental dishonesty underlying their entire relationship. She was falling in love with a man who didn't exist, while the real Marcus remained hidden behind layers of lies that were becoming more suffocating with each passing day. After walking Sarah to her door and ensuring she was safely inside, Marcus sat in his truck for several minutes before driving home. The contrast between her modest apartment complex and his gated mansion felt more stark than ever. She worried about $1,000 car repair while he owned art worth more than most people's annual salaries. She considered taking a second job to make ends meet while he employed dozens of people and made business decisions involving millions of dollars. The next morning, Marcus made several phone calls using his real identity and connections. Within 2 hours, he had arranged for Sarah's car to be repaired by a shop that owed his company several favors. The work would be completed at cost, a significant reduction from the original estimate, and the shop owner had agreed to tell Sarah that they had found the problem was less serious than initially diagnosed. When Sarah called that afternoon with excitement and disbelief about the reduced repair cost, Marcus felt a mixture of relief and deeper guilt. He had helped her without revealing his true identity, but the deception was becoming more elaborate and harder to maintain. Each lie required additional lies to support it, creating a web that threatened to trap them all. Emma noticed his distracted mood that evening during dinner, studying his face with her usual perceptive intensity. "Daddy," she said quietly, "you look like you're carrying something heavy in your heart. Is it about Sarah? Are you still worried about telling her who we really are?" Marcus looked at his daughter across the elegant dining room table, surrounded by the luxury that defined their real life. Emma deserved honesty from him, just as Sarah did. But the longer he maintained the deception, the harder it became to imagine how he could reveal the truth without destroying everything they had built together. "I'm working on it, sweetheart," he promised. "Sometimes the right thing to do isn't the easy thing to do, and sometimes you have to be very careful about timing when something really important is at stake." Emma nodded solemnly, but he could see the worry in her young eyes. His 80-year-old daughter understood that their happiness hung in the balance of decisions that grew more complicated with each passing day. The emergency call came at 6 in the morning, Sarah's voice tight with panic and desperation. The school's heating system had failed completely during the night, and with temperatures dropping below freezing, there was no way to hold classes safely. The district's maintenance crew wouldn't be available until late afternoon, and the private repair companies were quoting astronomical emergency service rates that the school simply couldn't afford. "Mike, I know this is asking a lot, but you mentioned you work with heating systems sometimes," Sarah said, her words tumbling together with stress. "The principal is talking about canceling school for the rest of the week, which means our students will miss instructional time we can't afford to lose. Some of these kids depend on school for their meals, and their parents can't afford to miss work to stay home with them." Marcus was already reaching for his clothes, his mind racing through solutions with the efficiency of someone accustomed to managing crises. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, he promised. "Let me take a look and see what we're dealing with." The drive to Sarah's school gave him time to consider the dangerous territory he was entering. As CEO of a technology company, he had overseen the construction and renovation of multiple office buildings, working closely with engineering teams and contractors. He understood complex building systems far better than any maintenance supervisor should, and he would need to be careful not to reveal knowledge that Mike Thompson wouldn't possess. Sarah met him at the school's front entrance, her breath visible in the frigid air inside the building. She wore multiple layers of clothing and looked exhausted from spending the early morning hours trying to coordinate emergency solutions. Behind her, Principal Martinez paced anxiously, fielding phone calls from concerned parents and frustrated district administrators. The boiler room was located in the basement, accessible through a narrow corridor lined with student artwork and motivational posters that seemed almost cheerful despite the crisis unfolding around them. Marcus followed Sarah and the principal down the stairs, his experienced eye already assessing the building's infrastructure and identifying potential problems before they even reached the equipment. The moment he saw the boiler system, Marcus understood exactly what had happened and how to fix it. A critical valve had malfunctioned, causing a cascade of failures that had shut down the entire heating system. The repair was complex but not impossible, requiring specific parts and technical expertise that would typically take a commercial service several hours to coordinate. "This is more serious than I initially thought," Marcus said carefully, crouching beside the massive boiler unit. "But I think I can get you temporary heat restored while we work on a permanent solution." For the next 2 hours, Marcus worked with focused intensity, his movements precise and confident as he navigated the complex system. He found himself drawing on knowledge gained from years of corporate facility management, using technical skills that Mike Thompson should never have possessed. Sarah watched him with growing amazement, occasionally handing him tools or holding flashlights as directed. "How do you know so much about these industrial systems?" she asked during a brief break, studying his face with curious eyes. "This is incredibly sophisticated work. Most building maintenance supervisors work on much simpler equipment." Marcus felt sweat gathering on his forehead despite the cold air, and not just from physical exertion. He was walking a tightrope between helping Sarah and exposing his true identity, using expertise that threatened to reveal everything he had been hiding. "I worked on some larger commercial properties before my current job," he replied, focusing intently on the valve assembly to avoid meeting her gaze. "You pick up a lot of specialized knowledge when you're trying to advance in the field." By noon, Marcus had restored enough functionality to bring the building temperature to acceptable levels. But the permanent solution would require parts that weren't readily available and expertise that went beyond what any individual maintenance worker could provide. Without thinking, he pulled out his phone and called his assistant, speaking in the authoritative tone he used for business emergencies. "Jennifer, I need you to contact Morrison Engineering and have them send a team to Riverside Elementary immediately. Tell them it's a priority repair for the Chen Industries Community Outreach Program, and they should expedite all parts and labor." The moment the words left his mouth, Marcus realized his mistake. Sarah and Principal Martinez stared at him with shocked expressions, clearly having heard both his commanding tone and the reference to what was obviously a major corporation. He had spoken with the voice and authority of someone accustomed to mobilizing resources and solving problems with a simple phone call. "Mike," Sarah said slowly, "who exactly did you just call? And what is Chen Industries?" Marcus felt the carefully constructed walls of his deception beginning to crumble around him. His heart pounded as he searched for an explanation that might salvage his cover story, but the damage was already done. He had spoken with the confidence and connections of a CEO, not a building maintenance supervisor struggling to make ends meet. "I have some contacts in the commercial repair industry," he said weakly. "Sometimes they're willing to help with community projects at reduced rates." But Sarah's expression had shifted from gratitude to confusion and growing suspicion. She had heard something in his voice and witnessed capabilities that didn't match the humble persona he had presented. The technical expertise, the authoritative phone call, the ability to mobilize professional repair teams with apparent ease, all of it pointed towards someone with far more resources and influence than Mike Thompson should possess. Principal Martinez stepped forward with obvious relief, focused on the practical implications rather than the mysterious nature of Marcus's connections. "If you can really get this fixed properly, we'll be incredibly grateful. Our students can't afford to miss any more school time, and the district's budget simply doesn't allow for emergency repairs of this magnitude." Marcus nodded, acutely aware of Sarah's continued scrutiny and the growing weight of questions he couldn't answer without revealing everything. The heating crisis was resolved, but his carefully maintained deception was beginning to unravel in ways that threatened to expose not just his identity, but the fundamental dishonesty that had shaped their entire relationship. What would you do in Marcus's situation? Should he tell Sarah the truth now, or try to maintain the deception that's becoming harder to sustain? Have you ever found yourself in a situation where helping someone you cared about meant risking everything you'd built together? As they walked back through the now warming school corridors, Sarah remained unusually quiet, her thoughtful gaze following Marcus's every movement as if she were seeing him clearly for the first time. The weekend farmers' market buzzed with Saturday morning energy as families wandered between stalls selling fresh produce, handmade crafts, and aromatic baked goods. Marcus had suggested meeting Sarah there for a casual morning together, hoping the relaxed atmosphere might help ease the tension that had lingered since the heating system incident at her school. But as they walked hand in hand between the colorful booths, he could feel her watchful gaze studying his every reaction and comment. Sarah had been unusually quiet since Tuesday, asking subtle questions about his work experience and background that suggested she was beginning to piece together inconsistencies in his carefully constructed Mike Thompson persona. She noticed when he automatically reached for expensive organic produce without checking prices, caught him demonstrating knowledge about wine that seemed sophisticated for a maintenance supervisor, and observed the confident way he interacted with vendors as if he were accustomed to being treated with deference and respect. At the artisan coffee booth, Marcus ordered their drinks and handed over a $20 bill without thinking, telling the vendor to keep the generous change. Sarah raised an eyebrow at the casual tip, but before she could comment, a familiar voice called out from behind them with unmistakable urgency and concern. "Boss, we need to talk about the Morrison situation right away." Marcus felt his blood turn to ice as he recognized James Harrison's voice. His business partner and closest friend stood 10 feet away, dressed in weekend casual clothes but wearing the expression of someone dealing with a corporate crisis that couldn't wait for Monday morning. James had obviously spotted him from across the market and approached without noticing Sarah standing beside him. The word hung in the air between them like an accusation. Boss. Not Mike, not buddy, not friend. Boss, spoken with the automatic deference of someone addressing their superior in a business context. Marcus watched Sarah's face transform from confusion to sharp attention as she processed this new piece of information that didn't fit anything she knew about Mike Thompson, building maintenance supervisor. James suddenly noticed Sarah and stopped mid-sentence, his expression shifting to horrified realization as he understood what he had just done. His face went pale as he recognized the implications of his mistake, the way his single word had potentially destroyed months of careful deception. "I'm sorry," James stammered, looking between Marcus and Sarah with obvious panic. "I thought you were someone else. I mistook you for my boss from across the market. You look just like him from behind." But the explanation sounded forced and unconvincing, especially when combined with James's expensive clothing, his confident bearing, and the way he had approached Marcus with the familiarity of someone who worked closely with him on important business matters. Sarah was too intelligent and observant to accept such a transparent attempt at covering up what was clearly a significant slip. Marcus felt sweat gathering despite the cool morning air, his mind racing through possible explanations that might salvage the situation. But each potential story seemed more elaborate and unbelievable than the last, and he could see in Sarah's eyes that she was beginning to connect dots that led to uncomfortable conclusions about who he really was. "James, this is Sarah Williams, the teacher I've mentioned," Marcus said carefully, hoping his friend would understand the delicate nature of the situation. "Sarah, this is James Harrison. We've known each other for years." James extended his hand with forced casualness, but his nervousness was obvious to anyone paying attention. Sarah shook his hand politely while studying his face with the careful attention of someone trying to solve a puzzle. She noticed his expensive watch, his perfectly tailored casual clothes, and the way he carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to success and authority. "It's nice to meet you, James," Sarah said with polite reserve. "How do you two know each other? Do you work in building maintenance as well?" The question hung in the air while James struggled to find an answer that wouldn't contradict Marcus's established cover story. His hesitation was telling, and Marcus could see Sarah registering every pause, every uncertain glance, every sign that there was more to this encounter than appeared on the surface. "We've been friends since college," James finally managed. "Different career paths, but we stay in touch. Mike mentioned he was seeing someone special, and I'm glad to finally meet you." Sarah smiled with apparent warmth, but Marcus could see the wheels turning behind her eyes. She was a teacher, trained to observe student behavior and detect when someone wasn't telling the complete truth. The interaction with James had provided her with new information that didn't align with everything she thought she knew about Mike Thompson. After James excused himself with obvious relief and hurried away through the market crowd, Sarah and Marcus continued their walk in uncomfortable silence. She picked up a beautiful hand-thrown pottery mug at one of the craft stalls, examining it with more attention than it deserved while clearly processing what had just occurred. "That was interesting," she said finally, her tone carefully neutral. "Your friend James seems very successful. He has that confident bearing that comes from working in a leadership position. It's unusual for maintenance supervisors to have such close friendships with corporate executives." Marcus felt the walls closing in around him, each of Sarah's observations pushing him closer to a revelation he wasn't prepared to make. "He's done well for himself," Marcus replied weakly. "We've maintained our friendship despite taking different paths after college." But Sarah wasn't satisfied with such a vague explanation. She continued asking gentle but pointed questions as they moved through the market, inquiring about his college experience, his career trajectory, and the nature of his friendship with someone who was obviously wealthy and influential. Each question felt like a probe designed to test the consistency of his fabricated biography. At the flower stand, Sarah selected a small bouquet of daisies while watching Marcus in her peripheral vision. She noticed how he automatically pulled out a credit card for the purchase, the same expensive-looking card he had used several times despite supposedly living paycheck to paycheck as a maintenance worker. She observed how vendors treated him with subtle deference, how he moved through the market with the confidence of someone accustomed to respect and attention. "Mike," she said quietly as they prepared to leave the market, "can I ask you something directly? I've been a teacher for 7 years, and I've gotten pretty good at reading people, especially when they're not telling me the complete truth. There are things about you that don't quite add up, and after meeting your friend James today, I'm more confused than ever about who you really are." Marcus felt his carefully constructed world beginning to collapse around him. Sarah deserved honesty, but the truth would require explaining not just his wealth and position, but the elaborate deception he had maintained from their very first meeting. He looked into her intelligent, questioning eyes and realized that his time was running out. The phone call came on a rainy Tuesday evening, and Marcus could hear tears in Sarah's voice before she even spoke. The school district had made final budget decisions, and Riverside Elementary was losing its art program, library aid, and after-school tutoring services. Programs that Sarah had fought tirelessly to protect were being eliminated, leaving vulnerable children without resources that had become lifelines in their educational journey. "I feel like I've failed them," Sarah whispered into the phone, her voice breaking with exhaustion and despair. Maria was finally making progress in the reading program, and now there won't be anyone to work with her individually. David found his passion through art class, and now that outlet is gone. These aren't just budget cuts, Mike. These are dreams being destroyed, futures being limited because of money. Marcus sat in his home office, surrounded by quarterly reports showing record profits while listening to the woman he loved describe the devastating impact of losing programs that cost less than he spent on a single business dinner. The contrast was so stark it felt surreal, and the weight of his deception pressed down on him with crushing force. Through his office window, he could see Emma in the garden with Mrs. Patterson, both of them tending to the flowers that bloomed in abundance thanks to professional landscaping and unlimited resources. His daughter attended a prestigious private school where art, music, and individual tutoring were considered basic necessities rather than luxury programs fighting for survival. How much would it cost to save those programs? Marcus asked carefully, though he already knew the answer would be pocket change compared to his company's budget. Sarah laughed bitterly through her tears. About $60,000 annually. It might as well be $60 million for all the chance we have of raising it. The parent fundraisers bring in maybe $5,000 a year, and most of our families are already stretched beyond their limits just covering basic school supplies. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of impossible irony crushing his chest. He had donated more than that amount to charity galas he barely remembered attending. His company's coffee budget for a single quarter exceeded what Sarah needed to save programs that meant everything to children who had so little. That night, Marcus lay awake staring at the ceiling of his master bedroom, tormented by the knowledge that he possessed the power to solve every problem Sarah faced but remained trapped by the elaborate lies he had constructed. Emma's innocent questions about when Sarah could visit echoed in his mind, mixing with Sarah's broken sobs about failing the children she loved. The next morning brought another devastating call. Sarah had been working late in her classroom, writing grant applications and researching emergency funding sources, when she discovered that the heating system repairs had mysteriously been completed overnight by a professional crew. The work was extensive and expensive, far beyond what the school could have afforded, yet no one seemed to know who had authorized or paid for the repairs. Principal Martinez mentioned that the repair company said something about a community outreach program, Sarah said with confusion evident in her voice. But when I called to thank whoever was responsible, they wouldn't give me any details about the benefactor. It's wonderful that it's fixed, but it feels strange not knowing who helped us or why. Marcus gripped his phone tighter, realizing that his attempts to help secretly were creating more suspicion and confusion. Every anonymous gesture of assistance, every problem that mysteriously resolved itself, was adding to Sarah's growing awareness that something didn't make sense about her relationship with Mike Thompson. That afternoon, Emma confronted him with the directness that always cut straight through his adult complications. "Daddy," she said while they worked on her homework together, "why can't you just tell Sarah who we really are? She's not like those other ladies who only wanted your money. Sarah cares about kids who don't have anything, and she works hard to help people who need help. Don't you think she would understand why you were scared?" Marcus looked at his daughter's earnest face, seeing Linda's wisdom reflected in those dark eyes. Emma had inherited her mother's ability to see through to the heart of complex situations, to find simple truths hidden beneath layers of adult fear and complication. "You're right, sweetheart," he admitted quietly. "Sarah deserves to know the truth about who we are. I've been so afraid of losing her that I forgot the most important thing your mother taught me about love. Real love isn't about what you have or don't have. It's about trust and honesty and being brave enough to show someone your true self." That evening, Marcus made the decision that had been building in his heart for weeks. He called Sarah and asked if she would come to dinner on Friday night, explaining that there were important things he needed to share with her. He could hear the uncertainty in her voice, the way she responded with careful politeness that suggested she was preparing herself for difficult conversations. After the call ended, Marcus sat with Emma in the living room, explaining that Friday would be the night when everything changed. They would tell Sarah the truth about their real life, about the mansion and the company and the reasons behind his deception. Emma listened with solemn attention, understanding that their happiness hung in the balance of choices that could no longer be delayed. "I hope she forgives us," Emma said quietly, curling up against his side on the leather sofa. "I really want her to be part of our family, Daddy. She makes you smile the way you used to smile when Mommy was here." Marcus held his daughter close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo and marveling at her capacity for wisdom and hope. Outside, the city lights twinkled like stars, each one representing lives being lived with honesty and authenticity that he had temporarily abandoned in his search for protection from pain. Friday would bring revelation and risk, truth and possible heartbreak. But it would also bring the chance for genuine love built on foundations of honesty rather than elaborate deceptions. As Marcus tucked Emma into bed that night, he knew that whatever happened, they would face it together with the courage that real love demanded. The wrought iron gates opened silently as Marcus's pickup truck approached his estate, and he could see Sarah's face change in his peripheral vision as they drove up the winding driveway lined with mature oak trees and professionally maintained gardens. Her expression shifted from curiosity to confusion to dawning realization as the massive stone mansion came into view, its elegant architecture and sprawling grounds speaking of wealth that made a mockery of every lie he had told about struggling to make ends meet. "Mike," Sarah said quietly, her voice tight with growing understanding, "whose house is this? And why are we here?" Marcus parked in the circular driveway beside the marble fountain, his hands trembling slightly as he turned off the engine. The moment he had been dreading and anticipating for months had finally arrived, and there was no turning back from the truth that would either save or destroy everything they had built together. "It's my house, Sarah," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "My name isn't Mike Thompson. It's Marcus Chen, and I'm the CEO of Chen Industries. Everything I've told you about who I am has been a lie." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah stared at him with an expression that moved through shock, hurt, and anger in rapid succession. Her face went pale as she processed the magnitude of his deception, understanding that their entire relationship had been built on a foundation of elaborate lies designed to test her character without her knowledge or consent. "You've been lying to me for 3 months," she said, her voice rising with each word. "Every conversation, every moment we shared, every time I worried about money while you live in a mansion and could have solved every problem I face with pocket change. How could you do this to me? How could you make me feel like I was dating someone honest and real when none of it was true?" Marcus felt tears burning his eyes as he watched the pain and betrayal wash over her face. "I was trying to protect myself," he said desperately. "After my wife died, every woman I met changed completely when they discovered my wealth. They saw dollar signs instead of a grieving widower raising his daughter alone. I created Mike Thompson because I needed to know if someone could love me for who I really am, not what I own." Sarah's laugh was sharp and bitter, cutting through his explanation like a blade. "So you decided to test me? Like I was some kind of gold digger who needed to prove my worth? You watched me struggle with car repairs and budget cuts, watched me consider taking a second job to make ends meet, all while you could have helped but chose to maintain your elaborate charade instead?" Before Marcus could respond, the front door of the mansion opened and Emma appeared, followed by Mrs. Patterson. His daughter had been watching for their arrival, and her face lit up with nervous excitement as she saw Sarah stepping out of the truck. But her smile faded as she noticed the tension crackling between the adults, the way Sarah stood apart from her father with rigid posture that spoke of anger and hurt. "Sarah," Emma called out, running down the front steps with obvious joy. "I'm so excited you're finally here. I want to show you my room and the library and the garden where we grow vegetables for Mrs. Patterson's cooking." Sarah knelt down to Emma's level, and Marcus watched her struggle to contain her emotions in front of his innocent daughter. Her teacher's instincts kicked in as she spoke gently to Emma, explaining that the adults needed to have an important conversation first, but that she was happy to see her. Emma's perceptive eyes moved between her father and Sarah, clearly sensing that something was terribly wrong. "Is Sarah upset about something, Daddy? Did you tell her the secret about who we really are? I thought she would be happy to see our real house." The word secret hit Sarah like a physical blow, and Marcus watched her realize that even his 80-year-old daughter had been part of the deception. Emma knew about Mike Thompson, had helped maintain the charade, had been complicit in the elaborate lie that had shaped their relationship from the very beginning. "You involved your daughter in this deception," Sarah said, her voice shaking with renewed anger. "Emma knew you were lying to me, knew you were testing me like some kind of social experiment. What kind of message does that send to a child about honesty and trust in relationships?" Marcus felt his world crumbling around him as he saw their relationship through Sarah's eyes. What had seemed like necessary protection now looked like cruel manipulation. His elaborate test had become a betrayal of the woman who had shown him nothing but authenticity and genuine care. "Sarah, please let me explain," he pleaded. "Come inside and let me show you pictures of Linda, let me tell you about the women who pursued me for my money, let me help you understand why I was so afraid of being hurt again." But Sarah was already walking toward her car, her body language radiating hurt and anger that made Marcus's chest ache with regret. She paused at the driver's door and turned back to face him, tears streaming down her face as she struggled to find words for the betrayal she felt. "I fell in love with Mike Thompson," she said, her voice breaking. I fell in love with a man who understood financial struggles, who worked with his hands, who seemed real and honest and vulnerable. That man doesn't exist, does he? He was just a character you created to test whether I was worthy of your real life. Marcus took a step toward her, but she held up her hand to stop him. The worst part is that you're right to be suspicious, she continued. There are women who would pursue you for your money. But instead of trusting that I might be different, instead of being honest and giving me the chance to prove my character authentically, you chose to manipulate and deceive me for months. What should Marcus have done differently from the beginning? How would you react if someone you trusted had been testing you without your knowledge? Have you ever made choices out of fear that ended up hurting the people you cared about most? As Sarah drove away from the mansion, Marcus stood in his circular driveway feeling more alone than he had since Linda's death, watching the taillights disappear and wondering if his need for protection had cost him the love he had been desperately seeking. Marcus sat alone in his study for 2 hours after Sarah drove away, staring at the framed photograph of Linda that had watched over his desk through 3 years of grief and failed attempts at finding love again. Emma had retreated to her room after asking tearful questions about whether Sarah would ever come back, and Mrs. Patterson had quietly served dinner that no one felt like eating. The mansion felt cavernous and empty, filled with the echoes of harsh truths and broken trust. When the doorbell rang at 9:30, Marcus wasn't sure he had heard it correctly. Mrs. Patterson had gone home for the evening, and Emma was finally asleep after crying herself into exhaustion. But the sound came again, and through the security monitor he saw Sarah standing on his front porch, her face streaked with tears and her posture radiating a mixture of determination and uncertainty. He opened the door to find her holding a small manila envelope, her eyes red from crying but her expression more thoughtful than angry. She had clearly spent the past hours processing everything that had happened, working through the shock and betrayal to reach some deeper understanding of the situation they faced. "I couldn't leave things the way they were," she said quietly. "Not without understanding why you felt you needed to protect yourself so completely. May I come in? I think there are things you need to tell me, and things I need to say to you." Marcus led her to the living room, where she sat carefully on the edge of the leather sofa, maintaining distance while studying the photographs that covered the mantelpiece and side tables. Her teachers I took in the details of his real life, the evidence of wealth and privilege that surrounded them, but also the more personal touches that spoke of genuine love and loss. "Tell me about Linda," she said softly. "Help me understand what happened to make you so afraid of being honest with someone who was falling in love with you." For the next hour, Marcus shared the story he had never fully told anyone else. He described Linda's illness, the way cancer had stolen her away piece by piece while Emma was still small enough to need both parents desperately. He talked about the promise Linda had extracted from him on her deathbed, her insistence that he find love again and give Emma the mother she deserved. Then came the harder part, the succession of women who had pursued him after an appropriate mourning period, attracted by his wealth and status rather than his heart. He described dates where women's personalities changed dramatically upon learning about his financial situation, relationships that felt transactional rather than emotional, encounters with gold diggers who saw Emma as an obstacle to be managed rather than a child to be loved. Sarah listened without interruption, her expression growing more understanding with each painful revelation. She began to see Mike Thompson not as a cruel deception but as a desperate attempt to find authenticity in a world where his wealth made genuine connection nearly impossible. "I brought something for you," she said finally, opening the manila envelope and extracting several photographs. "These are pictures from my classroom, my students, my real life. I want you to see who I really am, just like you've shown me who you are." The photographs revealed Sarah's world in vivid detail. Children from diverse backgrounds working together on projects, Sarah kneeling beside struggling students with infinite patience, bulletin boards covered with student artwork and achievement certificates. But it was the last photograph that took Marcus's breath away, Sarah at the homeless shelter where she volunteered, serving meals to families while wearing the same genuine smile she had shown him from their very first meeting. "This is who I am, Marcus," she said, her voice steady but emotional. "I teach children who come to school hungry, who live in apartments without heat, who wear the same clothes 3 days in a row because their parents are working multiple jobs just to survive. I know what real struggle looks like, and I know the difference between someone who has money and someone who has character. Marcus felt tears gathering as he looked at the photographs, seeing Sarah's authentic compassion captured in moment after moment of service to others. This was the woman who had fallen in love with Mike Thompson, someone whose values and priorities would never be swayed by wealth or status. At that moment, Emma appeared at the top of the staircase in her pajamas, having been awakened by voices in the living room. She descended the steps slowly, her small face hopeful but uncertain as she approached the adults who held her future happiness in their hands. "Sarah," Emma said in a small voice, "are you still mad at Daddy? He was only trying to protect us because some ladies were mean to us after Mommy died. He didn't want anyone to hurt us again." Sarah's expression softened completely as she looked at Emma, seeing the innocent wisdom of a child who understood her father's fears even if she didn't fully comprehend the complexity of adult relationships. She opened her arms, and Emma ran to her, curling up beside her on the sofa with the trust that children reserve for people who truly care about them. "I'm not mad anymore, sweetheart," Sarah said gently, stroking Emma's hair with tender fingers. "I was hurt because I didn't understand why your daddy felt he couldn't trust me. But now I do understand, and I want you to know that I fell in love with both of you long before I knew about this beautiful house or anything else about your money." Marcus watched this exchange with a mixture of hope and lingering fear, seeing the genuine affection between Sarah and Emma but uncertain whether forgiveness was possible after the elaborate deception he had maintained for months. Emma looked up at Sarah with her mother's perceptive eyes. "Does this mean you might want to be our family? Daddy needs someone to help him not be so scared all the time, and I really want a mom who understands about books and teaches kids and makes Daddy smile again." Sarah's eyes met Marcus's across the room, and he saw in them the possibility of redemption, the chance that love might be strong enough to overcome the fear and dishonesty that had nearly destroyed everything they had built together. The mansion around them suddenly felt less like a barrier and more like a home waiting to be filled with the laughter and love of a real family. 3 weeks passed in careful rebuilding, with Marcus and Sarah taking tentative steps toward reconstructing their relationship on foundations of complete honesty. They had agreed to start over, dating as their authentic selves while giving Emma time to adjust to the changes in their family dynamic. Marcus had shown Sarah every aspect of his real life, from board meetings to charity galas, while she had welcomed him into her classroom and volunteer work, sharing the passion that drove her dedication to serving others. The call came on a Monday morning while Sarah was preparing for another difficult week of teaching without the programs that had been cut from her school's budget. Principal Martinez's voice vibrated with excitement and disbelief as he delivered news that seemed impossible given their financial circumstances. "Sarah, we've received an anonymous donation that covers all the programs we lost, plus funding for new initiatives we never thought possible. The art program, library aid, after-school tutoring, everything is restored. But there's more, they're funding a complete technology upgrade, a literacy program expansion, and scholarships for families who need help with school supplies." Sarah sank into her desk chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of generosity being shown to her school and students. The donation was precisely what they needed, addressed every concern she had raised, and came with no strings attached except the requirement that it remain anonymous. But something about the timing and specificity felt familiar, tugging at her consciousness like a half-remembered dream. Who would do something like this? She asked, though part of her already suspected the answer. The donor insisted on complete anonymity, but their representative knew details about our specific needs that suggested someone with intimate knowledge of our situation. Principal Martinez explained that the donation had come through a foundation that specialized in educational grants, but the paperwork was structured to protect the benefactor's identity completely. However, he mentioned that the representative had asked specifically about Miss Williams's literacy program and had emphasized the importance of supporting teachers who went above and beyond for their students. That afternoon, Sarah drove to Marcus's mansion with a mixture of gratitude and gentle confrontation brewing in her heart. She found him in his garden with Emma, both of them tending to vegetables that would eventually find their way to local food banks. The scene was peaceful and domestic, father and daughter working together in the afternoon sunshine, but Sarah could see the tension in Marcus's shoulders as she approached. Emma ran to greet her with soil-stained hands and a bright smile, chattering about the tomatoes they were growing and the science project she was planning about photosynthesis. Sarah listened with genuine interest while watching Marcus's face, noting how he avoided direct eye contact and busied himself with unnecessary garden tasks. "Emma, sweetheart," Sarah said gently, "could you go wash your hands and start your homework? I need to talk to your daddy about something important." After Emma skipped toward the house, Sarah turned to Marcus with an expression that mixed appreciation with loving exasperation. She walked closer to him, close enough to see the guilty flush spreading across his face as he realized she had connected the dots between his resources and her school's sudden good fortune. "The anonymous donation to Riverside Elementary," she said quietly, "wasn't really anonymous, was it? You know exactly how much we needed, exactly which programs were cut, exactly what would make the biggest difference for my students. The foundation may have protected your identity, but your heart gave you away." Marcus straightened slowly, meeting her gaze with a mixture of hope and apprehension. He had wanted to help her school from the moment she first mentioned the budget cuts, but he had been afraid that such a gesture would seem like an attempt to buy forgiveness or manipulate her feelings toward him. "I couldn't stand watching you suffer when I had the power to fix everything," he admitted. "Those children deserve every opportunity to succeed, and you deserve to teach without worrying about basic resources. But I didn't want you to think I was trying to solve our relationship problems with money." Sarah stepped closer, reaching up to touch his face with gentle fingers. "Marcus," she said softly, "this donation isn't about us. It's about children who need books and art supplies and individual attention. You didn't use your wealth to manipulate me, you used it to support something I care deeply about. That's not buying forgiveness, that's showing love through action." The relief that flooded Marcus's features was profound, and Sarah realized he had been carrying the weight of this secret gift along with his fears about her reaction. She understood that his anonymous generosity represented growth, a willingness to use his resources to support her passions rather than test her character. "There's something else," Marcus said, pulling out his phone to show her the foundation's long-term plans. "The donation isn't just for this year. It's an endowment that will fund these programs permanently, ensuring that future students will have the same opportunities your current class is receiving." Sarah felt tears gathering as she comprehended the magnitude of his commitment to her work and her students. This wasn't a grand gesture designed to impress her, it was a practical investment in the children and communities she served, structured to provide lasting impact rather than temporary relief. Emma's voice called from the back door, interrupting their conversation with characteristic 80-year-old timing. "Sarah, can you stay for dinner? Mrs. Patterson is making your favorite chicken recipe, and I want to show you the book report I wrote about one of the stories you gave me." Sarah looked between father and daughter, seeing the hope in both their faces as they waited for her answer. This family had welcomed her with genuine love, shared their fears and vulnerabilities, and supported her dreams in ways she had never imagined possible. The deception that had once seemed like betrayal now felt like the protective instinct of a man who had been hurt too deeply and loved too completely to risk his heart carelessly. "I'd love to stay for dinner," she replied, watching Marcus's face transform with relief and joy. "But first, I have something important to say to both of you." She took Marcus's hand and called Emma over to join them in the garden surrounded by growing things and golden afternoon light. "I love you both," she said simply. "I love Marcus for the man he really is, wealthy or poor, CEO or maintenance worker. I love Emma for her brilliant mind and kind heart. And I love the family we can build together based on honesty, trust, and the courage to be vulnerable with each other." If this story has touched your heart tonight, let us know where you're listening from around the world. Love stories like this remind us that authentic connection transcends circumstance, and that sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is the truth about who we really are, along with the faith that they will love us anyway. As the three of them walked toward the house together, Marcus realized that Linda's promise had finally been fulfilled, not through deception or testing, but through the simple courage to trust love over fear, honesty over protection, and authentic connection over careful control.